Millionaire tests his humble chef at an open house. But what happens next will shock you. Margaret had always been a talented chef, finding solace in the rhythm of chopping vegetables and the aroma of garlic sizzling in olive oil. As the head cook at the Collins estate, she was used to a life spent behind the scenes, shielded from the glamorous world of the wealthy. Each day, she prepared extravagant meals for the estate's owner, the affluent Charles Collins, a man whose charm and wit captivated everyone around him, yet left Margaret feeling invisible. His striking blue eyes and confident demeanor kept her curious, but she had never dared to dream that someone like him could even acknowledge her existence. One fateful morning, as Margaret was bustling about the kitchen in preparation for a grand charity gala, she overheard rising tensions emanating from the main hall. Drawn to the commotion, her heart raced with curiosity. She surrounded herself with her favorite pots and pans, trying to concentrate, when the voice of Charles broke through her thoughts. "How can the head chef just drop everything?" he demanded, his irritation palpable. Margaret's heart slid into her stomach. The event was for 200 guests, and they had no one to lead the kitchen. She edged closer to the door, and through a small crack, she saw Charles pacing, his frustration only evident in the way his shirt tightened against his chest. In that moment, his piercing gaze caught her, igniting a spark of fear and thrill within her. "You, Margaret, you're the cook here, right?" he called, unexpectedly directing all attention towards her. "Yes, Mr. Collins, that's me," she replied, instinctively standing a little straighter, despite her heart thumping in her throat. "I need you tonight," he stated, resolve replacing his previous irritation. "You have to oversee the dinner for the charity gala. There is no one else I can count on." Margaret hesitated, overwhelmingly aware of how far this request stretched her capabilities. Yet, the opportunity to step into the limelight beckoned, whispering that it could change her life. After a moment of deep breathing, she nodded. "All right, I'll do my best." The day spiraled into a whirlwind of activity. Margaret orchestrated the kitchen like a skilled conductor, delegating tasks and blending flavors, pouring every ounce of her passion into the meal preparations. As twilight threaded through the windows, she continued to weave her magic, blissfully disconnecting from the pressures of the aristocratic world around her. She could almost taste the success. Later that evening, with guests adorned in lavish gowns and tuxedos mingling outside, Margaret felt both anticipation and anxiety. Just then, Charles strutted into the kitchen, his expression curious as he observed her deftly plating dishes. "Looks like you know what you're doing," he said, leaning on the countertop, admiration flickering in his eyes for a brief moment. "Cooking is the only thing I know how to do well," she replied, focusing on the task at hand. Charles smirked, but said nothing more. As the gala commenced, she remained tucked away in the kitchen, overseeing the service like the captain of a ship amid a storm. Laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the hall, while Margaret felt increasingly like an outsider. Just when her self-doubt began to creep in, Charles appeared again, this time dressed impeccably in an evening suit. "You need to be out there with the guests," he insisted, electrifying Margaret with a mix of confusion and excitement. "You created these dishes. They deserve to see you." "Me?" she stammered. "They're here for the food, not the cook. They're benefits for a good cause. Plus, it would be refreshing to see someone genuine among all the pretenses, wouldn't it?" His infectious enthusiasm cheered her for a moment. Taking a deep breath, she reluctantly agreed and changed into a simple yet elegant dress, attempting to ease away her inhibitions. As she stepped into the hall, all eyes turned towards her. The thrill of being seen as something more than just the cook filled her with a new strength. A mixture of admiration and disdain washed over her, particularly from one woman in particular. Helen, the socialite and a good friend of Charles, was known for her sharp tongue and imperious beauty. "Who is this?" Helen queried arrogantly, eyes narrowed, as she strutted closer to Charles. "This is Margaret," he replied coolly, keeping the judgmental edge in Helen's tone at bay. "She's responsible for the meal tonight. Everyone is praising her." An eyebrow raised, Helen's disdain bled into her voice. "I do hope she knows her place." Margaret held her ground, her voice steady as she answered, "My place is where my abilities take me." Charles chuckled, unabashedly admiring Margaret's confidence. Helen huffed and turned away, clearly annoyed while Margaret's heart swelled with newfound pride. As the night unfurled, an investor stepped forward, complimenting her ingenious recipes and eager to discuss her culinary visions. Margaret was pleasantly surprised to find her ideas resonating beyond the kitchen, and in that moment, she dared to dream bigger. Once the gala wound down, Charles caught her near the exit, his expression thoughtful. "You surprised everyone tonight, including me," he admitted. Margaret shrugged, a smile waging war with her modesty. "I just did my job." "No, you did much more. I want you to work with me on something monumental, something that will disrupt our worlds." Margaret stared, chest tightening as his words sunk in. Accepting this felt like standing at the edge of a precipice, ready to leap into the unknown. She nodded slowly, allured by the prospect, yet wary of the risks that might loom ahead. The next day, while clearing the remnants of the gala from her mind, Margaret awoke, filled with uncertainty. Could she really step out of her predictable life into Charles's ambitious shadow? The thought tethered her to the kitchen, while scratching at the back of her mind was his earlier proposal, echoing, asking her to turn something ordinary into something special. What if agreeing meant stepping into a game where control slipped through her fingers? Later, Charles visited the kitchen, dressed again in his tailored attire. "Have you made your decision?" he inquired, a harsh light grazing his sharp features. She looked up, fighting the irritation rising within from his commanding tone. "I'm weighing it out. Decisions this grand take time." His smile flickered momentarily before he retreated. "I expect great things from you, Margaret." Her blood boiled with indignation. "And I expect respect from you." They stared at each other, electricity dancing between them. Charles' waveringness hung in the air, finally dimming. His eyes softened. "I want to create something exceptional with you, not just for me," he said quietly, genuine behind the mask of superiority. Margaret felt her heart race, drawing a deep breath to steady her composure. "I'll reveal my decision by the end of the day, but I need you to prove this isn't just one of your games." Amid a fluctuating heartbeat, she also felt hope blooming from a place buried deep within. As the hours fled toward the end of her shift, other staff asked her about her sudden spotlight at the gala. They expressed their admiration and the stunning turn of events that had allowed her to shine. It was overwhelming, and yet she marveled over how Charles ardently watched her, clearly impressed by her new stature. After collecting her thoughts, she took the plunge and approached Charles, who was deep within the chaos of papers and plans. "What truly awaits me with this partnership?" she ventured. His gaze evaluated her, as if catching sights of her determination for the first time. "I want you to help me build a culinary empire," he told her, voice serious. Margaret processed his words carefully. Their weight lingered heavily in the air. "Why me specifically?" "There are plenty of renowned chefs who would jump at this opportunity." "Because you're authentic. You've got heart, Margaret, and that's what is missing in this industry." Surprised by his sincerity, she matched his intensity with her gaze. "I need to think this through." Charles nodded respectfully, albeit with a hint of anticipation. As the day faded into evening, Margaret found herself reflecting on everything that had transpired. She weighed every moment and each word exchanged with Charles, aware of how this path, if taken, could lead her into an exhilarating, yet perilous territory. As morning light streamed into the kitchen of the Collins estate, Margaret found herself in a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The offer Charles had laid before her loomed large, its weight heavier than the pots and pans surrounding her. She had no prior experience managing a grand project, but the undeniable thrill of stepping out of her comfort zone both terrified and excited her. Could she truly create something monumental alongside someone as confident and driven as Charles? Throughout the day, Margaret diligently prepared for lunch service, her mind occasionally wandering back to the gala and the way Charles had looked at her. During a lull in activity, her fellow cooks approached her, curiosity etched on their faces. "Did you really impress Mr. Collins last night?" one of the younger cooks, Jamie, asked. eyes wide with excitement. They say he's planning something big with you. Margaret felt her cheeks flush, both embarrassed and proud. It was just a good night, that's all, she replied, trying to underplay the conversation. But inside, her heart raced at the thought of Charles potentially viewing her as more than just the head cook. It sparked a blend of hope and doubt within her. As the kitchen bustled around her, she heard the sound of Charles's familiar footsteps echoing through the hall. He entered with an air of purpose, his sharp suit emphasizing the confidence he carried. "Margaret, can we talk?" he called out, his gaze locking onto hers. She collected herself, wiping her hands on her apron. "Of course, Mr. Collins." Charles led her outside to a quiet terrace overlooking the sprawling grounds of the estate. The sun shone on the manicured lawns, and in that moment, Margaret felt exposed amidst her thoughts. He turned to face her, expression earnest. "I wanted to discuss the project further. This opportunity could change everything for you, and I think we need to get on the same page." Margaret nodded, the gravity of his statement sinking in. "I appreciate that, but I also need to be candid. This feels like a lot, more than what I'm used to handling." Her voice wavered slightly, revealing the nerves she had kept concealed. "That's precisely why I reached out to you. I can see something in you that no one else seems to notice," Charles replied, leaning closer, his intensity making Margaret's pulse quicken. "You possess creativity and passion that are rare. I want us to shape that into something that will not only evolve the dining experience, but also elevate your career." She pulled in a deep breath, feeling flattered, yet uncertain of what lay ahead. "But what if I fail? This kitchen, this atmosphere, it feels like a world I'm not equipped for. Failure only comes from not trying. And trust me, I won't let you fall. We'll do this together. We'll form a team and face every challenge as partners," he urged, his tone compelling. Margaret felt a mix of admiration and apprehension swell within her. The relationship they had built, previously rooted in his authority and her subservience, could morph into a collaboration, a bond built on mutual respect. But could she truly trust him to guide her? At that moment, a fire ignited within Margaret. "All right, I'll do it. Let's build this together," she asserted, determination flooding her voice. Charles flashed a genuine smile, a rare sight that warmed her. "Good. Let's start brainstorming over lunch then. I have some contacts lined up that will help us expand our reach, and I want you to lead the discussion." Margaret's heart skipped a beat, unsure if she could handle leading a meeting with experienced industry players. Yet, something in Charles's enthusiasm was contagious, sweeping her doubts aside. As they returned to the kitchen, Margaret poured every ounce of energy and creativity into her work, determined to prove herself. Soon, word began to spread about her involvement in the upcoming culinary project. The staff, who had once seen her as just the cook, started to look at her differently, and Margaret felt an exhilarating thrill of being seen. The following weeks became a blur of prepping dishes and brainstorming sessions with Charles. They collaborated, balancing their ideas while learning to navigate their differences. Charles often pushed her to think bigger, asking her what type of cuisine they wanted to represent and who they envisioned their clientele to be. Each discussion unveiled layers of her aspirations and fears alike. One evening, deep into a brainstorming session, they discussed the concept of integrating local ingredients into high-end dining. "What if we create a menu that tells a story? Each dish could represent a part of our community, connecting us to farmers and artisans," Margaret suggested, her enthusiasm bubbling over. Charles listened intently, the gears turning in his mind. "That's brilliant. I love the idea of storytelling through food. It adds depth to the dining experience. But how do you envision presenting that?" Margaret thought for a moment, allowing her imagination to drift. "We could source ingredients direct from local farmers and showcase them on the menu. Perhaps even invite them to participate in a day at the restaurant to explain the essence of their products." Charles nodded, clearly impressed. "You have a gift, Margaret. You understand this on a fundamental level. But always remember, we must also maintain an element of sophistication to appeal to our audience." His business acumen complemented her creative approach, and she began to understand their dynamic better. As preparations escalated toward their upcoming meeting with potential investors, excitement and anxiety colored each day. Margaret found herself visiting local farms, discussing fresh produce with passionate growers, and gathering inspiration that fueled her dishes. Charles accompanied her to some meetings, bringing his charm along and weaving a narrative that captivated the farmers. All the while, Margaret basked in the warm glow of newfound confidence. Occasionally, they found time for brief slices of personal conversations that fostered a friendship beyond mere professional collaboration. Margaret came to learn about Charles's family background and his struggles to forge his own identity amid a lineage of wealth and expectation. He spoke candidly about the pressure he felt to uphold family standards while yearning for authenticity. During one particular outing to a nearby vineyard, they shared a sunset over glasses of red wine, truly bonding for the first time away from the pretense of the estate. Charles turned to her, voice low and sincere. "I've never met anyone like you, Margaret. You challenge me in ways I didn't know I needed." Margaret smiled, warmth radiating from her chest as she met his gaze. "I've learned a lot from you, too. You've pushed me to explore avenues I never dared to." However, with this journey forward, insecurities crept back at the back of her mind. What if the foundation they were building cracked under pressure? What if her friend's startling warnings of his reputation seeped into reality? Back at the estate, whispers from staff regarding the past echoed louder, drowning her thoughts with uncertainty. Yet, every time she doubted, Charles's confidence in her shone through, driving her to silence the doubts. But could she fully trust his intentions without transparency? One afternoon, the tension in the kitchen skated dangerously close to boiling over. They were near the end of lunch service, and everything had been racing smoothly until Margaret implemented a change in a classic dish. Misdirected orders started to stack up. Sauces turned cold, garnishes went missing, and tempers flared among the kitchen staff. As Margaret ran to the dining area to fix it, she slammed into Charles, who was surveying the debacle. "What's happening here?" he inquired, irritation lacing his voice. "We're just trying to adjust some recipes for the dinner tonight." Margaret snapped, pushing nerves aside. No. You can't just adjust recipes without consulting me first. We'll confuse customers," he shot back. The confrontation spiraled, voices rising above pots and clamor of the kitchen. Both felt the strain from the external pressures mounting, and within moments, they were face to face, frustration compelling them to break. "I have a vision. We need to take risks," she shouted, her passion igniting the air. "And we also need to be mindful of our clientele," he countered, anger emerging from his previous composure. His eyes scanned her passionately, almost pleading for understanding. In that moment of heated exchange, something shifted. They stood on the brink, waiting to either collapse in a mention of professional respect or embrace their insecurities full force. Maybe we need a reality check on priorities then. Yet, before words could spiral out of control, Margaret took a deep breath and stepped back, realizing they were both frayed, cognizant of the pressures that surrounded them. She softened her voice, dropping their defensive fronts. "Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. Let's recalibrate and regroup calmly. I don't want this to devolve into chaos. We're better as a team." To her relief, his expression relaxed, and he echoed her sentiment. "Agreed. Let's figure this out together." In those moments, Margaret realized that their dance was an intricate balance, both partners in tandem, attempting to navigate their growing bond while tethered to their professional aspirations. The truth of the matter dimmed their previous heat, and she noticed that deep down, they respected each other. The days that followed were equally challenging and enlightening. While they encountered setbacks and obstacles, they navigated through them, learning to communicate effectively. As they crossed paths with various producers and artisans who supported their venture, Margaret discovered the inspiration she had been searching for. Through slow, steady strides, their restaurant evolved, bearing the weight of chance and risk, creatively reshaping the expectations attached to fine dining. Yet shadows from whispers about Charles lingered. Margaret could not ignore them fully. There remained a unique cautiousness between them, stitched together with curiosity and respect, lingering doubts refusing to fade completely from her mind. Each day was a balancing act of forging forward, while making sense of challenges that strained their hearts along the way. As summer drew to a close and the grand opening of the restaurant approached, anticipation buzzed in the air like the hum of bees in a meadow. Margaret and Charles had spent countless hours refining their menu and discussing every minute detail. Each dish was carefully crafted to tell a story, connecting the diners with the community through locally sourced ingredients. Yet, despite the thrill of creating something extraordinary, Margaret couldn't shake the doubts that hovered like storm clouds. Amid the hustle and bustle of the kitchen, Margaret found herself on the verge of exhaustion. A busy week of final preparations left her drained, but every time she imagined the restaurant opening its doors, her excitement surged back. Wrapped up in this whirlwind of activity, Margaret entered the kitchen one morning, determined to keep her focus sharp. Charles arrived shortly after her, a clipboard in hand and a sea of papers tucked under his arm. "Morning, Margaret," he called, his voice holding that infectious enthusiasm that had drawn her into this venture. "I hope you're ready for this week's tastings. We've got some very important critics coming." "Yes, I'm aware," Margaret replied, attempting to mask her apprehension. Each critic's arrival felt like another spotlight. Their opinions could make or break everything they had built together. "I need you to be at your best. You have a talent, and you know how to connect with our ingredients. Just let it flow," he encouraged her, his confidence contrasting sharply with the tight knot in her stomach. "We're in this together, Margaret," he reminded her gently, as if sensing her unease. "You have my full support." The pressure was palpable. Still, Margaret felt a flicker of gratitude at his unwavering faith in her. As the days progressed, the restaurant was transformed. Polished silverware gleamed on tables set against the backdrop of an elegant dining room. Her heart raced when she qualified the menu, unfolding the narratives woven into each dish, infusing it with her spirit. However, the lingering whispers from both staff and followers regarding Charles's reputation gnawed at her like a persistent itch. While she had witnessed his determination to evolve their business, insecurity stirred within her mind where reality carved doubt from illusion. Was she stepping into a burgeoning career, or simply a phase destined to fade like a candle flickering before a draft? As the day of tastings approached, Margaret discovered herself oscillating between anxiety and excitement. She spent hours in the kitchen, ensuring everything was perfect. Every dish needed to reflect their vision vividly, and so she put her heart and soul into refining each element. When the day finally arrived, the atmosphere in the kitchen crackled with tension. Staff moved with fervor, knowing the eyes of critical palates were settling on them. With close to a full house anticipated for dinner, the buzz intensified as servers took their positions and Margaret stood by the pass, golden plates ready to be sent out. Charles entered, donning an attire that resonated sophistication and determination. "You look nervous," he remarked, keenly observing Margaret's jagged breath. "You've got this. Just remember what we talked about. We trust each other, and you are our star today." Margaret nodded, though her heart raced. As guests began to fill the dining room in elegant attire, nerves bubbled at the surface. What if they didn't resonate with her food? What if the critic's pen drew narratives that could sink their dream? Pushing those fears aside, she focused as the first dish exited the kitchen. Charles stood at the helm, greeting each guest with charm, the art of light conversation twirling effortlessly from his lips. They began with small plates, offering a tantalizing glimpse into the culmination of months of hard work. As she received plates back from front of house, opinions flowed in high spirits. The room echoed with laughter and clinking glasses, fueling Margaret's confidence. Yet Margaret couldn't help noticing how critics chatted together in low tones during dining. The tension hung in the air like a fog that refused to lift. Amid the enchiladas and delicate desserts, pressing thoughts crept forth. Soon after dinner settled, one of the influential critics came to speak with Margaret. "This dish, it's remarkable," she began, all visible in her eyes. "Tell me about the inspiration behind it." Margaret beamed, encouraged by the kind words. "I wanted to showcase delicate notes of the region. We source our tomatoes from a local farm. The basil comes from an herb garden in the heart of the community. I believe every ingredient tells a story of where it comes from, and I wanted our guests to experience that through my food." The critic nodded, clearly impressed. As Margaret continued to explain each course's nuances and ideas behind their designs, she could feel the once looming anxiety fading with her sincerity. Sharing her passion for cooking empowered her to provide authenticity while allowing her to focus on the moment's joy. As dessert was served, just after Margaret finished a conversation with another patron, she spotted Charles across the room. He was speaking with a group gathered around the critic, his expression entirely composed while the atmosphere swayed between feigned excitement and tension. Margaret's heart sank when she noticed faint lines of worry etched upon his brow, signaling he was grappling with something beneath the surface. Before the evening concluded, she walked over to him, concerned. "What's wrong?" she whispered, sensing that he had been watching the critics intently, their every nod indicating judgment looming in the air. Charles cast a brief glance toward the group before turning back to her. I want to make sure we leave a strong impression tonight. I've got stakes riding on this. And it's more than just business for me, Margaret." The confession hung in the air, reverberating in the pit of her stomach. "This is important. I can see it, Charles. But we've both put our hearts into this. People can't negate our passion. If they choose to overlook our truth, that's not a reflection of our worth." He looked deep into her eyes, gratitude surfaced through the tension. Underneath the uncertainty, a sense of collaboration returned, binding them together in a shared resolve. As the final course was completed, laughter turned into applause and compliments echoed through the dining area. At that moment, it felt electric. The dishes hit their mark, and the satisfaction radiated back to Margaret. Her energy renewed, while Charles absorbed their audience's joy. Once dinner concluded, Margaret felt a surge of adrenaline as the evening unfolded beautifully, the critics mingling and celebrating their culinary journey. Laughter filled the air, while the allure of fine wine mingled with success. Yet, amid the applause, a hint of wariness simmered beneath her exhilaration, a portentous whisper of potential challenges waiting just around the corner. Within a few days, however, everything that glittered began to dull. Whispers from critics started trickling into column inches. Some reviews praised their aspirations, while others hinted at looming skepticism behind Charles's credibility in the industry. Margaret sensed the atmosphere shifting. Anecdotes about his past felt like shadows lingering, specters trailing behind his evident talent. One morning, after the press released a contentious article that detailed allegations surrounding previous business partnerships, Margaret observed Charles retreating further into himself. The confidence that once illuminated his presence had dimmed. Her heart ached as she saw him fueled by negativity that swirled around them like a tempest. As Margaret prepared for a routine service, concern spiraled within her. She approached him with caution. "We need to talk. You can't let these comments define you. Remember who you are and what you want to achieve." He looked at her for a moment, an amalgam of frustration and vulnerability crossing his features. "I just don't know how to silence the noise. They're questioning everything about me." Biting her lip, Margaret sensed the crossroads they faced. "We'll forge ahead. We'll show them that our story is about more than the past. It's about our present and the future we're building." It was then that a resolve settled within them both. They revisited their shared vision, one grounded in authenticity that breathed life into their creativity. It was time to steer out from under shadows and transition to a narrative defined by their enduring camaraderie and commitment. Their continued perseverance led them to seek out local partnerships and customers, organizing events that elevated connections with community members. As the restaurant opened its doors for a weekend dedicated to bringing farmers and patrons together, an atmosphere of excitement resonated once more. The resilient spirit of their labor echoed beyond the walls, catching the media's attention again. Local farmers contrasted the former critiques, showcasing the heartfelt essence behind their restaurant. As the path ahead remained uncertain, Margaret's courage swelled, a keeper of the flame that ignited possibility. She and Charles stood side by side, determined to embrace the adventure before them, refusing to let the weight of judgment extinguish their dreams. And thus, they stepped into a future vibrant with promise and challenge. committed to redefining the culinary landscape together. As the weeks unfolded, Margaret and Charles propelled their restaurant into a new phase of existence. Local interest surged, fueled by the word-of-mouth buzz generated by their farm-to-table events. The community rallied behind them, and fresh stories began to emerge about their culinary journey, each meal resonating deeper than the last. Margaret found herself in a rhythm, and every dish served at the restaurant grew as a reflection of her identity as a chef. With every new ingredient, she felt like she was creating an experience for the diners, both tangible and emotional. Yet, swirling beneath the surface was the undeniable pressure brought about by the media. They focused on the ever-evolving expertise of the restaurant against the backdrop of Charles's complicated past. One rainy afternoon, Margaret brought in a fresh batch of heirloom tomatoes from a local farm, blissfully unaware that Charles was battling discontent. Upon entering the kitchen, she found him hunched over documentation, his features marred by tension. "Hey, everything all right?" she called softly, sensing his internal struggle. He glanced up, the weight of expectations evident in his eyes. "It's just the usual chatter. They think I'm a walking disaster, waiting to implode this restaurant," he admitted, shaking his head in frustration. Margaret's heart sank at his admission. "You can't let them get under your skin. What we're doing here is exactly what the community needs. I know you believe that, and I appreciate your support, but I sometimes wonder if it's enough. What if it all goes wrong?" Charles's voice trembled, the cracks in his facade beginning to break. Margaret stepped closer, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "You are not defined by whatever shadows they cast. We have shown our strength by building something incredible. Remember all our events? The connections we forged with people? That's what matters, even beyond what's published in those papers." He met her gaze, and slowly, she could see the gears in his mind working. "You're right, he finally said, relaxing ever so slightly. "Thank you for reminding me why we started this in the first place." Determined to lift their spirits, Margaret concocted a new dish, inspired by their recent hard work. Later that evening, she gathered the staff for a morale-boosting dinner, knowing that together they needed to remember their united purpose. As the kitchen buzzed with excitement, laughter filled the air, melodies of friendship ringing amidst the clattering of pans. On that unassuming evening, Margaret presented a dish that celebrated their local partnership with the farmers. It was vibrant and refreshing, a salad bursting with colors, paired with a homemade vinaigrette that sang of summers past. "This is the heart of what we do," she announced to the team. Charles raised his glass, or reflecting in his eyes. "Here's to Margaret and her incredible talent. This place is thriving because of your passion." Cheers resounded through the kitchen, laughter spilling into the corners. As they enjoyed the meal together, their camaraderie bloomed, and the shadows lurking in the corners of the restaurant slowly dissipated. With the excitement of the restaurant palpable, Charles suggested they organize a community open house. It would be a day to showcase the restaurant, their journey, and bring everyone together in celebration. Margaret was all for it, thrilled at the idea of welcoming more curious patrons into their space. They set a date, envisioning a vibrant day filled with food, conversations, and connection. Margaret reached out to local farms, eager to feature their freshest ingredients, while Charles took charge of organizing activities and live music. The buzz surrounding the open house spread rapidly through the town, urging people to consider the restaurant a welcoming family space. As the day approached, Margaret felt a potent mix of excitement and anxiety. Would the community respond positively? Would guests leave with newfound appreciation for their efforts? The day finally arrived, brightened by the sun shining over the restaurant. Colors danced in the flower arrangements that adorned the dining space, and the smells of grilled vegetables wafted through the air. Margaret stood at the entrance, adorned with a simple dress and an apron ready for action, her smile bright against the canvas of vibrant decor. Charles joined her, dressed more casually than usual, a grin plastered across his sun-kissed face. "You ready for this? Let's make an impression." As the doors swung open, guests flooded in with smiles, children giggling and eager to explore the space. Conversations erupted, and familiar faces shone with excitement as they immersed themselves in the vibrant energy. Margaret moved through the crowd, welcoming patrons and urging them to try the special dishes. The more she interacted, the more she felt that the community was genuinely appreciating their efforts. Gratifying feedback swirled around her, and warmth bubbled into her heart as she caught glimpses of Charles sharing in the joy with others. Bonding over laughter, their connection seemed to flourish even in adversity. As the day unfolded, Margaret and Charles stood side by side, watching the guests revel in the atmosphere they had created together. They shared a silent glance, one that spoke volumes. Margaret felt proud. The restaurant now stood not only as a place of business, but as a beacon for the community. However, just as they began to relax, the sounds of laughter dimmed, and murmurs signaled an encroaching unease. A group of disgruntled townsfolk gathered in a corner, their whispers too loud not to notice. Margaret's heart sank as she approached, sensing trouble brewing. "That's the chef with the connections," one voice hissed, clearly displeased. "What's next? This guy will ditch everyone once he's through with this restaurant." Margaret's stomach twisted. She turned to Charles, who approached. "We need to address this. People are drawn to gossip. We can't ignore it if we want to influence how they're feeling now." Charles nodded, determination radiating from him. "Let's invite them to the conversation. This is about more than just us. It's about forming bridges, building relationships out of trust." Together, they strode forward, negotiating their way through the uneasy crowd. Margaret raised her voice with confidence. "We're here for you. If you have concerns, we want to hear them. Let's talk about it together." Surprised by the unexpected transparency, some faces softened, retreating from the brewing hostility. One of the naysayers took the lead, offering a hesitant question. "What's the deal with that fancy gourmet stuff? Is it worth the price we're paying?" Margaret's heart raced, yet she spoke, her voice fluid. "We're focused on providing value through quality. Each ingredient is sourced locally, genuinely woven into our community fabric. We want you to experience something authentic, a connection to the land from which it originates." As the circles expanded, Margaret and Charles listened, weaving narratives back and forth, offering them the opportunity to express their feelings while dispelling concerns. Fear began to dissolve into curiosity and understanding, and as opinions shifted, more people leaned into the conversation. Taking the opportunity, Margaret decided to build a bridge between their culinary vision and the community perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments on a scale of 0 to 10. What would you rate this story? If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you in the next video.